Samuel, welcome along. I just want to direct you first of all to the Sunday Mirror because they are reporting going, as in Ruben Amorim. Is he still on his way despite that dramatic win at Old Trafford against Burnley yesterday afternoon at Old Trafford? What's your reading of this situation as it stands?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me on. Well, I asked him on Friday whether he could actually promise that he was going to still be the United manager after the September internationals, and he said he couldn't. That's not the way he works. But as far as he's aware, nothing will change. It of course helped that they won yesterday. They should have won a lot more convincingly. They played well, particularly in the first half. And after his rather colourful and headline-worthy answers at his press conference on Friday, you could tell the press officer was thinking already, God, how am I going to be able to handle this after what he said, where he said, yeah, sometimes I want to quit. And United say that it was said tongue-in-cheek, and of course you have to take that at face value. But watching Amorim, when he goes through the ringer during games and how he is after games, particularly after galling defeats, he is a man you can imagine walking away. And he said that to us after the Europa League final defeat. He said that if I don't have the confidence of the hierarchy, then I'll walk away without compensation. But I think as it is now, and having won quite, not necessarily well yesterday, but it was clearly a vital win, and the manner of it, sometimes getting a late win is a lot more meaningful. I would still, my gut feeling is that he'll be in charge for the Manchester Derby in 2 weeks.
Samuel, do you think he underestimated the size of the job at Old Trafford ahead of joining? Probably.
I think that he wouldn't be the first manager to do that, and the state of play at the time, I mean, it was only, I think after Ruben Nistelrooy's matches in charge, it was 11 games into the Premier League season. It was about a third of the way through, so the season was eminently salvageable. But he did make, even in that first game at Ipswich Town, there were decisions that you're still seeing the ramifications of, in that he started Casemiro in that first game. He's still leaning on Casemiro now. I think a team that wants to go anywhere this season, that aspires to qualify for Europe, possibly qualify for the Champions League with the advantage United have with the calendar, I don't think you can do that with Casemiro necessarily. I think it's a big ask. Some of the other players who didn't start in that game, he didn't start Kobbie Mainoo that week. That's obviously an issue that's resurfaced after he didn't play against Fulham last week. The flip side to that is that Kobbie Mainoo's got a bit of brass neck to say that he wants to leave when he can't get in the worst Manchester United team of 51 years. That said, it was 2 or 3 weeks into Amorim's tenure when he told us that the storm is coming, and then after that their form really did nosedive. And watching him at Grimsby on Wednesday with that massive downpour, it was impossible not to think of that comment. But it is quite remarkable how it has all of a sudden spiralled after the relative optimism of pre-season. The harmony in Chicago on that camp was genuinely good, and I know sometimes it can feel a little bit manufactured, but honestly, last year where Eric Ten Hag was still in charge, it wasn't right, because Ten Hag should have gone. The season before that, you sensed something was bubbling under the surface on tour, and that thing was Mason Greenwood, and that was obviously handled appallingly. But this pre-season, it was a genuinely harmonious tour, and United were looking in good nick. And then all of a sudden, they're being knocked out of the League Cup by a fourth-tier team.
Samuel, I know a lot of responses to Ruben Amorim and how he's perceived is met with, well, this is Manchester United. But you mentioned the memes almost now, that they've become memes, haven't they, what Ruben Amorim was doing with the tactics board and the magnets. But do you think it's been a bit too much of a pile-on? Do you think there's been a bit of an overreaction over what's happened over the past week with regard to Amorim?
I mean, with the tactics board, I saw obviously Grimsby mocked it yesterday when they went through their starting lineup, and then of course they lost at home to Bristol Rovers, which was probably the away bank of the week. There was always going to be a come down at Grimsby. I do remember a few years ago, Eric Ten Hag had pretty much the same thing out, and he was moving the pieces around. And that day was at Wolves when Marcus Rashford came on at half-time and scored the winning goal. And when that happens and you win a game, people aren't going to remember that. I mean, the fact that I remember it is a surprise to me. But you can get away with that in victory. When you're doing that against a fourth tier team, it's bound to be ridiculed. And we see it sometimes. There are a lot of things that come into football that it feels quite pretentious. There are a lot of phrases that have been creeping in that seem quite unnecessary when, back in the day, a manager would use the back of a cigarette pack to put his starting 11 down. But I think there has been a lot of constructive criticism in the wake of that defeat, but there needed to be. And Amorim can't get away with it because he started to make decisions over the past month that I think have been to the detriment of the squad. Whereas previously, I think those of us who work on patch would have agreed with the majority of decisions he made, whether it was getting rid of Marcus Rashford, deciding to let Anthony go on loan, the whole bomb squad, not allowing them to go on the pre-season tour to protect the harmony of the squad. I think that was the right decision. But with Rasmus Højlund, for example, which doesn't seem that major given that he's on the verge of moving to Napoli, but I think he cut his nose to spite his face with him, in that United's best games in pre-season were with Højlund on the pitch, i.e. with a striker on the pitch. When Højlund came out and spoke to us in Chicago and said, "I've no decision to make, I'm staying," after that, he barely had a kick. He came on for a cameo against Everton, and in every game since, he's not had a look in. He was unused in the final friendly, and of course, since the season started, he's not been involved in any of the squads. And it's a quirk of United that they were a team crying out for a striker, yet they've been operating without a striker, and they actually look quite good, yet they still struggle to score goals, or they don't score goals. I mean, their Premier League goals this season, 2 of them have been own goals, one's been a penalty. The other was a very clinically taken goal by Brian Mbeumo. But it did feel quite significant that during pre-season, that system as well, it's geared up to serve as a striker. And when you take a striker out of it, an out-and-out striker, it does change the dynamics. So I don't think that was really... I think that was him trying to make a point in response to Højlund, but it's not necessarily benefited the team, even though Højlund clearly is not good enough to lead the line for Manchester United, and that's why he's on the verge of moving to Napoli.
Samuel, what about the players and the dressing room and the reaction to the press conference on Friday, for example? We said earlier, it's not good when your boss said that he hates you. And also his stubbornness tactically of not changing, keeping that system, etc. There's more and more tension, it seems, coming from the players and the dressing room about what he's doing.
Yeah, there haven't been many leaks to emerge so far. It still feels quite early in the season for that. But midway through last season, I spoke to someone from Portugal who knows him quite well, and they said that he has a hard brain, which essentially translates that he is stubborn to a fault, and he will die on that hill of 3-4-2-1. He's never going to change there. He said on Friday that he would change, but only when the players have mastered that system, and of course it may never get to that point. And I do take his point. Like there was some gallows humour for him on Friday. I mean, for us, he is great. He's candid. He's frank. He's quotable. He is prepared to say he hates his players. He even said he hates his kids, but that was, I think, safe to say, tongue-in-cheek. But when he's in that form, it does bank a lot of goodwill with journalists, and you do want him to succeed. And he said about the Grimsby game, he said the system wasn't a problem there. He said in the first half, I don't even know what the system was. So there he was, kind of chuckling less than 48 hours after probably one of the worst defeats of his career. But then when you watch how well they played in the first half against Burnley yesterday, when they should have been 4-0 or 5-0 up at half-time, overall against Arsenal, the performance level was a big improvement on the majority of home performances last season. They started well at Fulham. Pre-season can be meaningless, but they did look a lot more fluid, the way they were operating, and it is a quirk, as I said earlier, that they do seem to be relishing playing without a striker at the moment, and Sesko, as he showed at Grimsby, has clearly not got up to speed. But the mood from the camp, speaking to the players on the tour, as I said, it was very good. They have bought into his methods. I think that you'd be hard pressed to come across a United player who'd go on the record and say, yeah, playing with a back three, it's not right for us. I mean, Matthijs de Ligt said something quite interesting to us on the post-season tour. He said that when you look at the majority of teams in Europe, the positioning changes, and sometimes they'll start with a back three in possession or out of possession. That brilliant Tottenham team that Mauricio Pochettino had years ago, sometimes it would be Eric Dyer dropping back, and Jan Vertonghen and Toby Alderweireld would split to allow the fullbacks to get forward and to supplement the attack. So I do take his point, but ultimately, if a Manchester United manager is going to be considered a success, they have to win the title. And the chances of United winning the title some point in the future under Ruben Amorim with a back three seem extremely remote. I mean, there is obviously the example of Chelsea doing it under Antonio Conte in 2016-17, but that does feel very much like an anomaly.
Yeah, another quiet weekend in the life of Manchester United. Samuel Luckhurst, thank you very much for your time this morning on Sunday Supplement.